Every morning when my alarm goes off, I don't hear a traditional chime. Rather, my Amazon Echo plays motivational music to encourage me to actually get out of bed. Then it plays a video news briefing, suggests what I should wear based on the weather, and it hands it over to my Google Assistant. Hey Google, what's on my calendar today?
Today, there's only one entry on your calendar. Meeting with Bahar.
I venture out of my neighbourhood guided by Google Maps. I follow its recommendation about where I should stop for coffee, and I use its suggestions for how I should respond to email. We now live in a digital universe where different pieces of technology compete for our attention, and others take care of tasks that I used to use my brain for. Some say this is making us more efficient, though others say it's making us distracted and lazy. The reality is, algorithms now make endless daily decisions for me based on how I and others have acted before. So what does it mean to be human if a bunch of algorithms guide me throughout my day? And if companies are owning my decisions, do they then own my brain? We delegate many of our basic mental skills to gadgets. Here's one way to look at it. Our internal navigation system is housed in the hippocampus, which has a volume of 6 cubic centimetres. So let's take a bit of the hippocampus and hand it over to Google Maps. Decision-making processes happen in the prefrontal cortex with a volume of about 150 cubic centimetres. Let's say a portion of those decisions are taken care of by a Google Assistant. Your working memory, which you use for holding things like telephone numbers and contact info, is now readily accessible in Gmail. And your short-term memory is stored on Google Calendar and Keep. Long-term memory for facts is pretty much distributed all over the web and accessible through search. I'm going to say 28% of your brain actually runs on Google servers, give or take. This sounds like a radical idea, but in fact, philosophers introduced it before any of these personalised and daily technologies were invented. Coincidentally, the same year as Google launched.
What do you think you do your thinking with? Maybe you think you do your thinking with your brain. I suggest to you that a whole lot of your thinking these days actually goes on in your tools, your smartphones, the internet, and so on. Those are actually doing your navigating, your reasoning, your planning, your remembering for you.
This idea is called the extended mind thesis.
The extended mind thesis is the idea that the tools that we use become parts of our mind. So when I use my iPhone for navigating or for remembering phone numbers or for looking something up, it's not just a tool, it's actually part of my mind, like a part of my brain.
So no matter what tool you use for navigation, a paper map, your smartphone's app, or a voice assistant, it becomes part of your mind. But what does it mean for my good old brain when some of these tools guide my thoughts and decisions? So does this mean you give up thinking on your own and start taking in AI recommendations as your own thoughts?
Well, the thing is, we actually never totally think on our own, right? We're all influenced by things we see. So what AI does is to be able to manipulate your environment, your information environment. And as it gets embedded into everything, as it gets embedded into our cars, our kitchens, our things, it's going to change a lot of things too. It is nudging you, right? It's not hitting you over the head. I mean, we wouldn't put up with it. It's not necessarily making decisions for you either, but it's getting in your head. All of a sudden, you're more incentivized. So you can look at it as this architecture that creates a maze for you, and then you make your decisions. And with artificial intelligence, the trick is that maze isn't visible, right? You don't see all the thinking that's going behind the screen that results in you seeing exactly what you're seeing. And as these technologies become integrated into the everyday devices, you're not going to see exactly what they're doing either, but they'll be there. The way they're employed right now is a couple of corporations that have a very different agenda than what I want to do with my life, right? So that's the problem. They're thinking about me on behalf of someone else.
So if these algorithms continue to suggest these subtle changes to our behaviour, does this change our psychology? And is this new technology changing our brain? I'm sure you've heard this question before. It's always been raised during any technological revolution. When it comes to this question, people broadly fall into two camps. One says, yes, tech changes us. We take on what we do and consume. It's kind of like the intellectual version of you are what you eat. The other camp says this is just panic. The effects of what we do in one domain are limited to that domain. That is, if you give short bits of attention to Twitter, that doesn't diminish your basic attention span elsewhere. But even if tech doesn't change the building blocks of how our brains process and compute, it can push the brain into various modes of operation. After being in those modes for too long, it might be difficult to break out. You might even forget how to. So the more you reinforce the habit of watching Netflix and YouTube, the harder it becomes to drop that and read a book. One of these problematic habits of thinking has been called distraction sickness. Many have observed how we've become unable to read anything longer than 3 paragraphs. One survey showed the percentage of American adults who read literature fell to at least a 3-decade low in 2015. A possible explanation, researchers said, is that there are more platforms competing for our attention than ever before. Not being able to sink into a novel points to a broader problem: our inability to sustain attention on a task. And this could cost us our intelligence. In fact, as pioneering psychologist William James once said, the strongest factor in setting geniuses apart from other people is the act of paying attention. What's more, many brilliant and creative ideas are born only when we're disengaged from the external world, something that technology has made it nearly impossible to do.
One of the really interesting challenges we've faced over the last 10 years is that we have devices in our hands and in our lives that demand constant attention and that promise rewards for that. One of the problems with that is that we've stopped having time to be bored.
You might ask, who wants to be bored? Of course, boredom isn't pleasant, but new research is finding what philosophers and psychologists have been suspecting all along, that boredom seems to be an essential state for the human brain. Despite what you might expect, an idle brain is usually highly active.
The great thing about boredom is that in fact it's one of the moments when your brain reconfigures itself and it creates unexpected connections. It is room for creativity and thinking, and it turns out that's actually really important for our mental health as well as our ability to think up new things.
It's hard to be bored anywhere when we have our devices with us at all times, but we might be missing out on all of the different, better ways our brains can work when left disconnected.
I think there's something about how we think about time now that makes it hard to carve out spaces for being disconnected, but all of the science and the social science and the psychology demands that we find ways of doing it.
Technology can help us go beyond the limits of the human brain. We can augment our limited memory with the unlimited capacity of hard drives. We can substitute our internal pathfinder with GPS. And we can find the best personalised options using AI. In many ways, technology makes us more rather than less. Does this change your brain? Well, anything can change your brain, whether that's using technology or learning the ukulele or taking up knitting. The real question is, if technology changes your behaviour over time, does this change who you are as a person and how you experience and navigate life? And are these changes what you want? So let's say you want to become kinder, smarter, more creative, more productive. Whatever it is, when you're thinking about setting life goals and developing good habits, you might have to think beyond yourself and scrutinise your technology as well. Because you are more than your brain. You are your brain plus Google plus algorithms. And now you share your consciousness with artificial intelligence. Now, this is the 4th episode in a 6-part series called Attention Wars. It's examining the psychology of attention, persuasive design, and our relationship with technology. I'd love it if you could join us for all of the episodes, in your own time, at your own pace, to consider the impact technology is having on your everyday life. Thanks.